When the economic environment becomes uncertain, we provide the truth from a breadth of perspectives to help people make decisions. We not only compile and analyze the data that moves our ever-evolving economy, we carefully craft our own to provide clarity across industries, businesses, and employment markets. We identify unique opportunities to deliver asymmetric returns and focus on capturing value created during periods of higher volatility, transforming the financial landscape together. We're MacroEdge.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to MacroEdge Radio number 23. This is John Galt speaking, back from the unfortunate situation last week, which exhausted everyone, that being, of course, Hurricane Helene, which is now exhausting a very tired, worn-out nation that has taken a beating. Let's face reality, folks. The storm wasn't so bad in my location, but the storm from the perspective of America has cut a swath through the southeast United States that many people do not recognize and are only starting to hear about now. We're going to cover a lot of that in the program today. We're going to cover the markets. We're going to cover the supply chain interruptions, and we're also going to talk with the MacroEdge team to reflect on the data, including a rather colorful, interesting, or shall we call it what it is, electioneering. That's right, electioneering employment report this morning. The non-farms payroll came out, and it was a spectacle of spectacles. And the reaction of the markets is almost as if it were pre-programmed to rally. There's no rhyme or reason for that until you break down below the surface of the numbers and start prying it open, and then you realize what they pull off. And it was pretty smart, because the American public looks at headlines. They don't look under the hood. They buy the car because it's pretty, not because it performs well, not because it lasts. And if 8 months from now there's 12 recalls, they blame it all on the manufacturer and simply sit there and say, but look at my car that I can't afford. Economic data is the same way now. It's shiny, it's pretty, and actually, it doesn't really reflect reality. It's underperforming. The engine is crap. And unlike similarly to the electric vehicles we saw in Florida, they tend to burst in flames when they get in contact with salt water. Let's hit the markets real quick. Dow up 341, NASDAQ up 219.37, S&P 500 up 5113 to 575107. Even the old Russell was up 1.3% today to 2209.48, an increase of 29.29. The volatility came down off the 20 mountain back down to 1860. The vol suppression continues. Volume looks decent, but not spectacular. Internals, market internals are new highs, of course, are more, but I haven't had a chance to go through that breakdown to see how many of them are ETFs, etc. Gold and silver, weirdly enough, took a beating today. I know you're surprised to hear that, but not as much of a beating as I thought they would. Gold was down $8 to $26.71. Silver down 2 cents to $32.43. So silver held the line and it's held above $32 for the week. This is a good indication that silver probably will break above $35 next week, and then it's off to the races above $35. Copper up on we'll round it up to 2 cents to $4.57. Oil was the big mover this week, finishing the week at 74.46 now for WTI, 78.08 for Brent. The Widowmaker natural gas is sitting at $2.83. I'm sure somebody will be stupid enough to buy it. It will not be yours truly. With that being said, let us start talking about the Treasury market, which was the victim of the unemployment data today. And when I say the victim, I mean anybody who was long bonds. Well, yeah, you took a beating today and yields shot up. It's almost as if it was pre-programmed to sabotage the Fed, but in reality, it was one of those data points that shocked everyone. And by that I mean the 2-year was up 21 ticks to 392, which is an amazing move for a bond. It's trading like crypto now. The 10-year was up 13 ticks to 398. So we're starting to head towards reinversion again. I don't think it'll happen, but it's possible. And the other inversion arena, the 3s10s, 3 month, 10-year, like I said, 398 for the 10-year, but the 3 month is at 464. So that's starting to narrow and close in. I still see the short end of the curve. I know you guys love the crumpling paper. The short end of the curve staying at a higher level, anything under 1 year. The middle being the sexy part, and then anything 10 years or above is going to blow out. At some point, people are going to realize the game is up. It's not worth investing in, and it's not going to have a happy ending. Next, let us go to everyone's favorite part of the information today, the economic data. This morning, the Bureau of Lying Statistics issued its non-farm payrolls, and it's almost as if the headlines were pre-written. Let me just give you the scan. If you hit Google News and do this, I always like to do this because it gives you a picture for the mainstream, and the mainstream is somewhat disturbing. News about jobs. CNN live updates. U.S. added a whopping 254,000 last month. New York Times. The job market is chugging along, completing a solid economic picture. Wall Street Journal. U.S. hiring accelerated in September, blowing past expectations. Axios. America's 1-2 punch of good economic news. CNBC. U.S. job creation roared higher in September as payrolls surged by 254,000. It's almost as if someone had the same headline writer. Don't ask me to explain it. But what was the truth? What was under the hood? What happened in this report that made things appear different and look so good? Well, first of all, year over year, we've had an increase in multiple job holders of 502,000. In September of 2023, we had 8,146,000 multiple job holders. We're up to 8,648,000. And a lot of these people have part-time jobs. Why is this important? If you're working 2 jobs for economic reasons because you can't keep up with inflation, pay your bills, pay your house, pay your medical, everything that's involved, it's not really contributing a lot to the economy. It's contributing to it on a dollar basis, but you're still struggling at home. And the middle class is taking a beating. What was more interesting was Table A8. Table A8 hit a major highlight that really caught my attention, and it caught the attention of Zero Hedge and many others. Weirdly enough, all of a sudden, the governments, state, local, and federal, added 785,000 jobs. Why in the world would the government have an outsized increase in hiring in a non-census year? Keep that in mind. We're not taking a census this year. We have additional temporary hirings. We're not in a period of war, but we've added 785,000 jobs. An astonishing figure when you think about that. Then we also had the news that even Bloomberg couldn't sit there and hide. Record seasonal adjustment tones down blowout U.S. jobs report. A record seasonal, and the birth-death model had an outsized adjustment, all in the same report. It's almost as if it's 30 days before presidential election. Maybe it's just me. Maybe that's just coincidence. Perhaps it's just an isolated incident. But if you take out the outsized government workers that were hired, and I can't make the adjustment yet, I haven't had time to do it today for part-time employment also, U3 is probably closer to 4.4 or 4.5% unemployment. U6, 8 to 8.2% unemployment. Because there's no way the government realistically added 785,000 jobs. It would be too noticeable. And if you look at one of the parts of the government that is firing right now, higher U3 is probably closer to 4.4 or 4.5% unemployment. U6, 8 to 8.2 unemployment. U6, 8 to 8.2% unemployment. Because there's no way the government realistically added 785,000 jobs. It would be too noticeable. And if you look at one of the parts of the government that is firing right now, higher education, public universities are laying people off in several states, in many states actually, because they can't fill the classrooms. Same is happening in high schools and elementary schools. Even in Florida, where Pasco County was discussing shutting down 3 schools due to us under 75% attendance for those locations. Other unusual adjustments, something that has really caught everyone's attention who is a numbers geek like myself and is a thinking man, and that is this. We've been in a downtrend for adjustments. We've had a higher estimate of jobs being reported initially, and then an adjustment down, and they close it. In July, miraculously, suddenly, weirdly, we added 55,000 jobs. In August, we added 17,000 jobs. Now, I'm sorry, but that's not data collection and reporting. That's electioneering. And both parties do it. I hate both parties, so you can't accuse me of saying I'm pulling for one side or the other. So the games are afoot, and we have to deal with this from a realistic perspective. If you look at Table A8 also, you see part-time for economic reasons. From August to September, there was a decline in all industries of people working part-time for economic reasons. There was an increase month over month for people who could only find work part-time, could not find full-time work. And an interesting thing that you have to take into consideration for this, people, part-time for non-economic reasons is up almost 160,000. No, it's more than that. I'm sorry. I'm doing my math on the back. My cocktail napkin math like I'm at a bar. Excuse me there, folks. I was looking at the wrong column on the chart. If you look at part-time for non-economic reasons, part-time for it was a 1,692,000 increase. Left some zeros off. Sorry about that. 1,962,000 people working part-time for non-economic reasons. We have a problem, Houston, and we also have a problem where people are starting to drop out of the gig economy. Why? Because they're not making enough money. Unincorporated gig workers are bailing. When you have too many door dashers in one geographic location, you're all competing for a fixed pie. And if the economy is declining, economic activity is declining in your city, your town, your village, wherever, the number of people who are going to be willing to spend money on a delivery service to get cold food from McDonald's, a liquor store, a grocery store, etc., declines proportionally. That's where the problem comes in. That's why we have to deal with this issue and address it head on. If you have a question, pipe up and ask. If you want to add your commentary about your local conditions, please do. I will say this with a non-plug plug, not an official endorsement, not an official commercial, but there are 3 charities that you could look out for to help the people of North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina. Eastern Tennessee took a beating, and not too many people are aware of that. Our own Melody Wright has been keeping everyone informed. If you follow her on X, I've contributed to Samaritan's Purse because I know that the money and the food will get to where it needs to go. The Cajun Navy also does an excellent job on the rescue and search operations. Highly recommend them. And Mercury One, which is Glenn Beck's charity, they have also put a major foot forward flying in supplies and helping to obtain the necessary logistical support to maintain rescue operations. Guys, if you can give. Right now, we've got a crisis in our part of Florida, and it's part of the economic crisis that's starting to furball. We've lost our tourist season. From Manasota Key to Big Bend, if you had a condo, a house, or a hotel, odds are you've lost your bottom floor. Some cases, you've lost everything the further north you go as the storm surge was higher than anticipated. The devastation, though, also extends beyond that. There are many elderly people who thought they had their lifelong retirement home in a small little mobile home in a plot that they could afford and pay for, and they got destroyed. If you can help, do so. That's what I'm going to be working on locally. It's going to be a crisis that's going to be swept under the rug by the noise of the election, but it is something that people should pay attention to. And it's a tragic indication of how the most vulnerable in our society are forgotten when these kind of events occur. And it's a crying shame. But if you have the capability to help out, please, gang, pitch in, help them out, because it is a disaster that many people will not be able to recover from in their lifetime. And it really does break your heart when you see the pictures, the inability to obtain basic groceries and needs. It is shocking. I'm going to bring Mr. Awesome up real quick to get his take on this economic data, because Ulysses Awesome is one of our television stars from MacroEdge. Just giving you a hard time there, sir. And really, what that is more. We want opinions on this from everyone's perspective. And to be quite honest, our team has been pretty much ahead of the game. This is the first time I think I've missed a jobs report in this year by that much. I only projected 103,000. I thought we were going to keep a statistical normalization and nothing outsized like we were talking about. Now, all of a sudden, we have this crazy number, which appears out of nowhere, of 254,000. And we find out the reason why is, but no one is going to come back and sit there and correct the record for at least 3 months, maybe 6. This is what you face when you politicize your statistical reporting and data collection at a national level, and it needs a total revamping. Mr. Awesome, let's get your take on this. How you doing this afternoon, sir? Good to have you back on the air.
Thank you much. Good to be back. I'm doing all right. How about you, John?
We're doing better, although we have another tropical storm, potential hurricane heading our way, it looks like, next week. So, yeah, more fun in Florida.
That's unfortunate. I hope that it doesn't turn into anything more than just a small storm that it's at right now.
Yeah, they're talking about 8 inches of rain at a minimum. So with the amount of rain we've had this year, it is astonishing. So what is your take on this data point that you've heard? Because you're out there in the field, you witness what's going on. Yeah. It seems to be an anomaly to me. What are you seeing in your part of the economy?
Sure. I think having the largest seasonal adjustment since data was being used is disconcerting. One of the things that I've been paying close attention to is the year-over-year unemployment rate change, because if you want to look at the direction of things, it's very rare that unemployment rate change increases, let alone continuously on a year-over-year basis. So I'm going to just comment on the spaces here with a chart that I put together this morning, showing just how abnormal that data was reported today is. And while everybody's talking about what a great and strong September we had, what we've actually got is 12 consecutive months of unemployment rate having increased over 8%. 8 of the last 12 were larger than 8%. But it's been 12 months since the first 8% rate increase. Now, if we go back to 1948, the only time that that's happened has been in recession, with the exception of 3 months in 1967 and 1 month in 1953. But we're at 12 months. So for me, looking at this data, I'm not seeing that the trajectory is changing. I see it as we got a headline showing September was better than what people expected it to be, but I don't think that it changes the direction of things. And I think that given how much unemployment has increased over the last 12 months, it doesn't really change my point of view on the labor situation. And certainly in the Twin Cities area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, in Minnesota, construction employment has been very shaky. I personally have had a lot of applicants lately applying for positions. So that tells me that things are looser than they were on the employment front, as opposed to 16 to 18 months ago. You couldn't get anybody to apply if you had to. I mean, everybody was working. And we're not seeing that. So at least regionally, in the Midwest, I see some slowdown construction, but definitely the unemployment news today was mostly headlines and not a lot of digging into the reality of the situation.
I tend to agree. We're seeing the same thing here, except we're expecting a obvious massive surge in employment in construction and building, because the remodeling and rebuilding process here is going to be incredible next year. But unfortunately, we're paying for it with the expense of a tourist season that'll be lost, as is North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. And I haven't even started into the logistics and supply chain implications of what we just witnessed, which will impact employment down the road, if not immediately, when they start doing the November numbers and December numbers. What do you make of the other shoe that dropped, where commercial real estate and commercial mortgage-backed securities are suddenly seeing a rapid deterioration in delinquencies, etc.
Wasn't it the largest increase on record this month is what was the headline, I believe?
I believe that's what it was from Fitch. Yeah, I believe that's what Fitch was reporting.
Uh, might have been the largest month, but I having watched it for some time, I don't see that it's a sudden thing. Um, I see, it just was an increase, but it's been increasing overall, and I don't see that there's going to be a whole lot of. I don't see a lot of economic data showing that that's going to suddenly slow down. Again, the trend is continuing in the direction of pressure. Um, Certainly, a lot of the private real estate, we're not seeing a lot of, but a lot of those are syndicated private funds as well, where you might have investors losing portions of their investments, and that's why you're not hearing more about individual operators being completely wiped out, because they're funds from multiple different pools that people are losing money in. So when you see all the headlines of buildings trading, for pennies on the dollar for what they were, it's not always just one person absorbing that loss. A lot of times it's several individuals absorbing smaller pieces of that loss.
And the scary part about that is we have the pension funds who have started dabbling in that along with private equity. And the private equity, we won't hear the outcomes for that until next year when those shoes start dropping louder and louder.
Yeah, definitely. And insurance and pensions funds, that's something that they've always done. And I think that you probably start to see more headlines about some of the pressures that they're facing in real estate in the near future. They tend to invest in larger dollar amounts later in the cycles. So they're not always the first ones to show that they're showing signs of distress, but they're certainly going to be amongst that group that's facing it.
Well, 100%. And I don't think we're going to see a sudden acceleration in the building of new commercial office ventures in many of the major cities. The people who are demanding return to office do not seem to understand there's a demographic shift underway. And this was in the New York Post the other day that the biggest demographic shift from California and New York State are wealthy millennials. They've figured it out. And you take those people out of those states, and many of them are skilled or degreed individuals or couples, and they're getting the heck out of the high tax, high cost states just to sit there and find a reasonable place to live, even if our weather sucks every summer.
Yeah, I think that we've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years, and it probably, we won't see the accelerated departures that we saw when return to office had yet to be really put into effect. But I think it's just cyclical in nature. We've seen this across the country numerous times as well throughout history, as certain types of industries suffer, or as certain elements of crime increase, people tend to leave cities. And we've got examples of that, going all the way back to the turn of the century. And we've got huge cities like Detroit that have faced decline over the years. Chicago has actually been losing population for decades. You've got cities like St. Louis, Missouri, that have lost population for decades. So it's not a new phenomenon. It just happens to be new areas. And I don't know if anybody would recall this, but even in the 70s, New York and San Francisco, crime was terrible in both places, and people were fleeing at the time, moving elsewhere. New York City got the reputation of being the moniker Fear City back in the 70s because of how bad crime was. And the Bronx were basically a disaster zone. So things that just play out over time. Large cities face, turmoil just like smaller cities would, but larger scales. Some of them recover really well. New York and San Francisco happen to have a lot going for them as far as locations and size of population. But you've got other cities that they just never recover. They just continue gradually declining. And I don't know what stops that, if anything ever does.
100% agree. And I think we're also looking at a situation which is new, the deterioration of brick and mortar retail versus the large mega box stores and the niche or special locations has created a new opening for people with innovative concepts. But at the same time, those areas with the smash and grab and the high crime issues, no company is going to want to open a new venture there. You're going to want to sit there and move somewhere where there's some law and order, not just because of the safety of your employees, but also for the purpose of not having your inventory running out the door once a month. It's gotten rather expensive. I'm going to bring Kalani in here in a few minutes too, by the way, because he's going to add into this. We're going to talk about FEMA. He had some good anecdotal stories about what happened out in Hawaii. Also, I'm going to bring Kenny up in from the team. Mr. Awesome, I appreciate your contribution. I'm going to ask you one more question before you go, though.
Yeah, sure.
What do you make of the bond market reaction to the data today? When our bond market starts trading like crypto, I get somewhat concerned.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it was necessarily related to that or something else going on, but it's something that I think should definitely be kept an eye on. We still have one inversion rate with a 10 and a 3 month, and I think that tends to be an important one to keep an eye on. So I think anytime bonds swing wildly, it's always cause for somebody to pay attention, right?
Well, it's not going to help the housing situation because we're going to see an increase in the 30-year mortgage next week. That's just reality for this kind of move. It increases proportionally.
The interesting thing, and I'm working on a piece this weekend for MacroEdge, so all of our readers are going to be able to see that, specifically talking about mortgage rates and the spread between the 10-year treasury and the 30-year mortgage. And when the spreads compress, it can be a two-way street, right? It can be a sign of economic recovery, and it can be a sign of recession or recessionary, right? And when unemployment rate is increasing and housing construction or housing sales are decreasing, and we get a rate spread drop, that's a sign of economic pressure, which from last quarter of last year, we did see that. And those are usually, at least over the last 50 years, have been signs of recession. So that's something everybody can look forward to reading this weekend's MacroEdge.
Well, I'll go ahead and tease mine also, and appreciate your input today, sir, and your analysis, because we're seeing this start to furball. I'm going to sit there and for everyone to know we've had a lot of crazy things happening the last 2 weeks, especially in my household. I'm going to be focusing on the sudden and miraculous repeat of 2012 because GDP and GDI were revised right before the 2012 election. What happened last week? GDP and GDI, gross domestic income, were revised before an election. Weird how that happens, and it follows in and flows into what's happened with the economic and statistical data reporting. If you want to read these articles exclusively on MacroEdge.net, go to MacroEdge.net. Get the 2-week free trial to Ozone. Don't miss out. We're going to be getting more content, more data, more charts, more graphs, exclusive to the MacroEdge team that will be presented there and there only. Yeah, you might see it borrowed by other websites and used for their own articles, but we will be publishing more, and we will be keeping everyone in the loop as to what's going on from a different perspective. Digging through these numbers, the hard data, is the trickiest part of this, and we have a team here. When one person can't contribute, the other 15 or 10 or 5 pick it up and run with the football. So MacroEdge.net, Ozone 2-week free trial. Check it out today. And I'm going to start bringing up some of our other members of the team. Kenny, are you ready to rock and roll? I can't tell. This app sometimes gets a little bit squirrely as far as bringing individuals into the conversation. When you give them permission, then suddenly it doesn't work so well. One of the things I want to talk about real quick, just highlighting what we were discussing with Ulysses Awesome, a little brief on Medium.com. 45% of Americans have $0 saved for emergency or safety net. 24% have less than $1,000, and 12% less than $1,000 to $5,000. That's 81% of the population. Gang, we have any kind of recession, the social safety net implications are going to be mind-blowing. And before you say, well, that's probably the young people, a lot of it is the young people. Unfortunately, a larger number of it are individuals over 65 years of age or 70 years of age who were given the false promise that Social Security would be enough of a supplemental income to survive on. Unfortunately, it's not. If you did not notice, we all survived the Great Pork Strike of 2024. An agreement was a temporary agreement, was a set. The concerns were real. If you don't know anything, if you don't understand the ports and the supply chain, I've worked in a port, I've worked with several ports as in my transportation career. But part of what comes on shore on the East Coast, all the way from Texas up to Maine, Chiquita, Dole, Del Monte have their own container ships bringing tropical fruit from Central and South America up to the United States. There was a realistic possibility of a banana shortage in 2 weeks. Now, I know I was making snarky comments on X about that, but that's just reality. That's how our produce gets here. And believe it or not, Florida doesn't grow everything 24/7 year-round, nor does Michigan, nor does Texas, and nor does California. There are interruptions and cyclicalities that are introduced by Mother Nature, just part of the beast. It's a temporary but convenient, since January 15th is the cutoff for the deal to be struck. And I have a feeling a lot of it will depend on who wins the White House this November. From tropical storm / Hurricane Helene, however, the damage is terrifying. We have lost a substantial chunk of Interstate 40 and Interstate 26 in North Carolina, along with numerous U.S. highways and bridges, the Blue Ridge Parkway, etc. In fact, the loss of tourism for Western North Carolina, Florida, and parts of Eastern Tennessee is going to be a major economic hit. But we've also hit some other things that you're not hearing about in the mainstream media. North Carolina factory hit after Helene. Baxter provides 60% of the IVs for the United States. Well, their major factory, the largest factory in North Carolina, was impacted and shut down by Hurricane Helene. It's located in North Cove. The flooding was massive. The factory will have to be cleaned, sterilized, and revalidated before it can come back online. Revalidation involves the FDA and people verifying that, in fact, yes, it is not that severely damaged. And another little town you've never heard of, a little small town called Spruce Pine, happens to make a singular item, high purity quartz, required for the production of semiconductors. Well, the rail line from CSX was washed out that goes in there, and the roads have been washed out going in there. And there's 2 companies in the little town of Spruce Pine. The Quartz Corporation says they have no visibility as to when activity will resume at the facilities. Goodbye, semiconductor industry, Q2, 3, and 4 of 2025. Kenny Capital from Tennessee is in here, and I think he'll have some more insights to what's going on. He is in the Nashville area, and I got to ask you, Kenny, what's the story with Tennessee right now?
Shoot, I mean, Melody would probably know more about, especially how that's impacted, Helene has impacted East Tennessee, but in Nashville, it's just, par for the course. It's bachelorette party, central. Hadn't really slowed down. The only thing that's really slowed down is sort of the demographics. So, yeah, it's sort of like redneck Disneyland here. So nothing has really changed.
The reason I'm asking is, has there been any shift in your real estate market with the demographics slowing down, moving into the city?
Absolutely. And that's, I kind of joke about that because I think that people can kind of look at Broadway and sort of extrapolate from there and say, well, hey, the economy is fine. Like, look at all these people like at these bars downtown and whatnot. And hey, the consumer is strong, where in reality, that's just not the case. I mean, you're talking about a few blocks of tourist activity. I mean, can you really extrapolate that to, the MSA, much less the rest of the country? Not really. I mean, yeah, we still have tourists and folks coming here, but, it's broadly speaking, everything is slowing here. I mean, that really shouldn't surprise anybody, whether that's, from the employment side. Leisure and hospitality has actually been negative for the past several months here in town. And homes aren't selling because it's the price. And we're a big international migration city. So, like, that's people moving in from out of state. We've had a lot of people come in from California, obviously, but really a lot of just major metros. And the reality is, when you go through a rate hiking cycle, generally speaking, net migration slows, household formation slows. I mean, obviously, underlying all of that is lending is slowing. And so, yes, we still have a lot of cash buyers, as do a lot of markets when it comes to real estate. But generally speaking, most folks, they're still financing those purchases. So it's the price. It's the price. People act like, hey, there's going to be like, there's all this, there's been, enormous growth in like dual income households, and that's supposed to like drive prices higher. When in reality, we've had dual income households for decades now. So people just need to just stop talking about that. It makes no sense. In the aggregate, that's not the case. So yeah, I mean, things are slowing. It's not like going to drop off a cliff overnight, but it's definitely slowing here in town. And I would just add, in general, what you're seeing across, and it's not just Nashville, but really across all these metros, is just the job growth, right? I mean, that's pretty much going to drive everything. The job growth is not broad-based. You're seeing basically the private sector is dead. Outside of like healthcare, there's no job growth. It's pretty much healthcare and government jobs. So unless that's going to broaden out, which I don't see that happening, especially where we're at in this rate hiking cycle, this is just going to continue, and we're just going to keep sort of grinding down. So whether that's, on the home sales front, obviously, job growth is going to be the same way, and the unemployment rate will, continue to move higher. Now, it won't move, in a straight line up like, we saw today. But yeah, I mean, things continue to gradually deteriorate. People should not look at 1 month of data and just say, oh yeah, like, oh, we've turned a corner. It's time to say we're in a new bull market. Come on now.
That's what I was wondering, because I think what we're about to see, and this could be the big thing, the hurricane could be the one thing that breaks the back of the short-term rental trend. It turns out the majority of the individuals in Western North Carolina with cabins, et cetera, that were Airbnbs, for lack of a better term, did not, and I repeat, did not have insurance, because why would you buy flood insurance in an area that has a once-in-a-500-year floodplain? So the Airbnb rentals are going to take a major hit, as well as in Florida, where Airbnbs were in the coastal regions. I think we're going to see a lot of people walking away from that business model who are impacted by this. I'm wondering if that's going to scare some people in your neck of the woods, because I do remember being in Nashville after the Great Flood downtown so many years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, if you just think about like, what's the target demographic in terms of somebody renting one of those out? And it obviously varies by, metro area, but it tends to be younger people. Cookie cutter example of that is, bachelorette parties. I mean, you're just not seeing those big groups of like younger females coming here. It's a much older demographic that you see coming here now. But here's like when I think about housing in general, is like a lot of people seem to look at it in terms of they only look at what's for sale, right? And so they're not looking at what's structurally in a market. And so the reason I say that is, like, for example, in a place like Sevierville or Sevier County, around 30% of the homes over there are vacant. So there's like three buckets: renter occupied, owner occupied, vacant, in terms of the structural supply of homes in any market. Anytime like that number is above like the national average, which is around 10%, that's typically associated with like a vacation market, or it could be short-term rentals, what have you, or second homes. It's sort of like kind of all of the above. So that's why, like, in a place like Sevierville, and you'll even see it in pockets of Asheville, and obviously in mountain towns like Breckenridge and all sorts of places out west, where they're gonna feel it pretty hard. Nashville, in terms of like the entire supply of homes, I mean, we have like around 2%, give or take, that we at least know of that are permitted are short-term rentals. So 2% of the entire housing stock. There are other markets, and I think I was talking to Kalani about this, where I want to say like Maui County is like 15% of their housing stock is short-term rentals. So if you just think about sort of the cascading effect of that obviously there's going to be some outsized sort of activity in some of these markets, versus a place like Nashville. And really what I'm talking about is Davidson County, because like that's city center. Obviously, the short-term rentals in our market are going to be sort of, in proximity to downtown. But yeah, I mean, this is going to affect, every market differently. I mean, I can just tell you from experience, just around town, just even with some folks that I know, that there are so many illegal short-term rentals, and I'm not here to call anybody out, and but it is what it is. People do what is just kind of trendy, right? I mean, it's like, well, hey, my friend did this, so I'm going to do that because I made money and now I'm a cash flow king. Like, come on now. It's sort of this, old trick and pony sort of thing.
I totally understand, sir. And I think we're about to see a reshuffling of the market now that everyone realizes that the government's not going to bail everyone out. It is a scary proposition. And before I bring Kalani up here in just a second to talk about that, folks, one thing that's going on is this myth that's been propagated by both parties, being using this story for election purposes. FEMA doesn't have any money. The Department of Homeland Security claims that they don't have any money. The fiscal year for 2025 just began on October 1st, and the disaster fund was reloaded with $22 billion on that day. There's also, in the Appropriations Act that was passed in late September, one simple line that says, if necessary, they can borrow funds from other agencies in the event of a disaster, which will be replaced at a later date and time. This is the kind of nonsense we're having to put up with this election season, which is far worse than anything I've ever heard. And later on, Kenny, I'll send you the bachelorette parties from the islands. Probably just as good as Nashville.
Appreciate that.
You got it anytime. All right, gang. Thank you very much, Kenny, for the update in Central Tennessee. And I'll be curious to hear what your governor does, because it doesn't appear that he's doing a whole hell of a lot to help people from what we're hearing down here. Kalani, are you ready to rock and roll, sir? Because you have the firsthand experience on what they did out in Hawaii. And I'm going to go ahead and fill that time in besides what's been impacted. Melody and I are chatting. She's got power back on, by the way. She's had a really, really rough time at Eastern Tennessee. And that made it a little bit scary. The initial estimates of the damage for the storm are over $160 billion now, making it one of the most costly storms in history. That number is going to go higher. So, Kalani, we're hearing stories that Hawaii is starting to recover, but it's still not getting down to and I'm reading this off X and other message boards, that it's not getting down to the people, that it's only the wealthy homes that are being rebuilt first. What would you like to add to that? Because this is what the people of North Carolina have to look forward to.
Hey, John.
Welcome aboard, sir.
I appreciate it. As far as rebuilding is concerned, from my observations and what I'm seeing and hearing, is that actually the cleanup first and the rebuilding, I think, in the last almost 12 months now has gone, I'm sorry, almost 14 months has gone pretty well. Um, I'm not. We're not. I don't know what you're reading on X or other sources, but what I'm seeing is that the normal average houses are starting to be rebuilt. I think the last time I checked, I saw about 20 to 24 single family homes already in some stage of being rebuilt. So that's good. The county of Maui has an expedited building process for building permits for people affected by the wildfires 14 months ago. So what I'm seeing is maybe a little in conflict with what you said you saw on social media.
Well, I appreciate that because I'd rather get information from people who have direct contact with individuals on the island. Uh, the Big Bend area of Florida might as well be Hawaii. It's so isolated. Most people don't know what it is. They see the pictures of some boats up in a tree and some destroyed homes and think, oh my God. The Big Bend area, Steinhatchee, I used to go deer hunting up there 35 years ago, 36 years ago. It's not very highly populated. It's a little bit more than it was before. So when you talk about the islands, it's the same concept. The stories you hear on social media may not reflect reality. The stories you're
Yeah.
going to hear out of Florida may not reflect reality. What's your take on the economic data you heard today and how the markets reacted? Just curious.
Just before I get to that, one more comment about Maui. Just for clarity's sake, FEMA, as far as I know, has absolutely nothing to do with the rebuilding efforts taking place on Maui. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's a good
That
thing.
Yeah, no, it is, and all of that has just entirely to do with both the state of Hawaii and the county of Maui. So I'll just leave it at that.
What do you make of the situation as far as the markets go? We seem to have the ultimate juicing of everything all of a sudden,
Mhm.
and it does serve its purpose to instill confidence in those who don't pay attention. But to me, I'm hearing some knocking in that engine, and it does not sound good. I can't talk about the layoff announcements that I'm aware of, but there are some big ones coming down the pike.
Absolutely, and from a high level perspective, I've been doing this since the mid '90s. So, from a high level perspective, what we're seeing and feeling at the end of this cycle just really feels a lot like the dot com bubble in 2000, right before the downturn, as well as the great financial crisis. So, um, anyone who thinks that GDP isn't positive or unemployment is low before a recession actually starts is really misinformed. On a more detailed perspective, some of the things that I've noticed the last couple weeks, and I say the last couple weeks because we didn't have a MacroEdge Radio last week for obvious reasons and any reasons you already specified. But about a week and a half ago, National Federation of Independent Business survey results came in, the profit survey. At this point, the data is showing that small businesses are struggling, and the data shows that the business profits are lower than both 2000 and 2008. And with the same release of data, the NFIB Small Business Optimism Index has never been this low without the US already being in recession. And most of the things I'm going to highlight, I've already shared charts with in the comments section. If anyone wants to look at the data, please don't take my word for it. I question everyone on X and I look at my own data. So I encourage everyone else to do so. Um, some of the other observations, we've seen China really, really spike hard. Chinese equity markets spike hard in the last couple of weeks. Just want to point out a couple things. The Chinese stimulus that everyone is so excited about is about $142 billion in Chinese currency. In the yuan, that's about a trillion yuan. Um, the Chinese banking system is valued at 60 trillion. So 142 billion, from my perspective, is nothing to get excited about. And the other thing that's concerning to me with some of the stimulus and some of the measures China is taking to boost their economy is that they lowered reserve requirements for their banks, which in my mind makes them more vulnerable to bank runs, and they have a history of bank runs in that country. There's other signs. I've seen some recent data that 401k custodians have shared. Big custodians like Fidelity or Vanguard, that loan requests and hardship withdrawals are rapidly increasing.
Let me
Yeah,
interrupt you real quick, Kalani, on this. The idea of 401k loans, people do not understand if you borrow money from your 401k and don't pay it back, that instantly becomes taxable income. And I don't think the younger generation understands that concept because they think they're just borrowing from themselves. They're in for a rude awakening, are they not?
absolutely. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, you get that 1099, it catches your attention real quick, and most people do not understand what that form is unless you've been in private business or been paid as such. And a 1099 for taking out your investment and having to pay back the capital gains at the full top rate, it will get their attention real quick. And I don't think this tax season is going to be so pleasant in 2025 for a lot of these individuals.
I would agree with that. Another thing I noticed, I think it was the conference board data came out maybe the beginning of the week or the end of last week, and the labor differential. For those that don't know what that means, that's a survey data where consumers who say jobs are plentiful minus those who are saying jobs are hard to find, that's really spiking hard. It's increasing rapidly, and historically that leads unemployment rates up. So that was pretty concerning. Another thing, IPO activity is just non-existent, which really is a kind of a demonstration of a weak economy. Bankruptcy filings spiked in September, and from what we've seen in the first 4 days of October, is going to be increasing. Also, and this is really important, something PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index. The economic activity in the manufacturing sector has now contracted for 6 months in a row and 22 of the last 23 months. So, these are just some of the observations I jotted down, to talk with you about, John. We can dive into anything you want to.
Well, I want to throw it. You brought back the .com era, which I was fortunate enough to lose a lot of money on, thanks to Merrill Lynch, and I'm not shy about calling them out over that. So when we talk about that, there's something different this time, and you just give me your take on this from your experiences in the industry, and that is this. It seems like everyone is trying to make up for losses, be it on real estate or crypto, by gambling on the stock market. And that's terrifying if we have a major correction.
I don't know if there's any hard data to support that, but anecdotally, absolutely. I think it's kind of a gambler's mentality, is it not?
Agreed.
When you're down, you tend to start chasing.
And that's what I'm looking at. If you look at the activity on Robinhood, which is a great measure of speculative fervor, in my opinion, and I think if you look at the monthly user data for Robinhood, you get some perspective because they're able to trade stocks on their telephones, just like they're able to gamble on football games or buy crypto and trade it.
Mm-hmm.
That should scare everyone because whenever a speculative bubble occurs, and if you looked at the correction on August 5th, I know that's ancient data according to everyone, an ancient event that really didn't happen, if you believe it. Those services, as usual, cause of order flow, were the last ones to have their orders processed. So by the time you got your order in, if you wanted to trade it at $100, by the time it was executed, it was $87. It starts to hurt.
Yeah.
And what happens? I subscribe to the rule. Give me your take on it. The rule is during a market move to the downside with violence, selling begets selling. And when you speculate on the upside, you panic to the downside.
I think that's true. And I think there's certain things, from a market structure perspective, that also accelerates that selling when there's panic.
That's just it. Individuals can't keep up with the algorithms nor the automated training. So what they're engaging in is basically scraps. And you're happy with the price you got and not having a larger loss. But what kills them is they see that loss that they took on a certain semiconductor stock. They read the headlines. They see this guy signing boobage and listening to him talk on the bubble visions about how great everything is. And they begin chasing it again, even though they just lost 15, 16% on the first trade. I don't understand the mentality, but if you look at it from a gambler's mentality, like you said, it does make sense. Chasing is the sport of 2024.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. One other comment. You mentioned the NFP report this morning, which we all viewed with a healthy dose of skepticism. Don't even get me started about the seasonal adjustments. I think I've been ranting about that all day on X. But the one thing that's really startling to me, it's with the seasonal adjustments. I mean, you mentioned specifically the huge spike in government employment. Non-seasonally adjusted, when you remove government employment, the private sector shed 458,000 jobs last month. That's a big number.
It's a monstrous number, and the addition of 918,000 non-seasonally adjusted government jobs by that same token is terrifying, because it's not possible. I don't care what environment or economy, it's a non-census year, and we don't have a world war occurring at this point in time. That type of hiring did not occur. So, I'll go with my original statement. This was an electioneering data point, nothing more, nothing less.
I wouldn't disagree with that, considering we're 4 weeks out from an election. So
yeah, conveniently how that occurs, isn't it, sir? Kalani, I appreciate your input on this, and I appreciate the update on Hawaii, because I think what we're going to witness in the tourist season is astonishing, needless to say. And I'm fearful that there's an underestimation of the impact on the Christmas season from what's happened from Helene. You've got a large swath of the population that's already gun shy and maxed out. And we're going to have to get Neely Tominga back on again to discuss this, because we're at a point in time now where a lot of individuals are not going to be reimbursed or have a home to live in those regions. Granted, Western North Carolina is sparsely populated in many areas, but it is going to cause a lot of people to become gun shy about making large purchases. Everyone's trying to use the stock market is the economy mentality, and I'm afraid this is going to have an impact that is outsized from what we're used to, because of the change in how our society is using credit. Now we're using credit to survive versus using it for that occasional purchase to fund a layaway, for God's sakes. That was the most basic credit formation we ever had. And now we're sitting here using it just for the necessities and for medical procedures, etc. Kalani, thank you very much. I'm going to start winding the show down, folks. Oh, I see Neely is here. I wonder if she wants to talk to us. But on a more realistic basis, the markets are squirrely, for lack of a better word. The data is no longer trustworthy if you look at all what we discussed in the show today. So you're going to have to do your own research, and I strongly advise every one of you to get a hold of MacroEdge.net and try out the 2-week free trial for Ozone. MacroEdge.net. That's MacroEdge.net. Subscribe, get the Ozone for 2 weeks. As you could tell from today's show, the team looked under the hood. We thought we were buying a ZR1, and we ended up with a Yugo engine. That car has problems, and there is rust in the floorboards. Watch out, because at some point, the reality of the decline in the high end of the retail market and on the lower end will meet in the middle, and it's not going to be a pretty picture. For MacroEdge.net and MacroEdge Radio, this is John Galt speaking, and hopefully next week and the week after, we can start getting our guest lineup back into formation. We're working on some big names. It's time for you to stay tuned. The next 4 weeks are going to be some of the wildest in American history. Don't miss it. Good night now.